Hello, everybody who's joined so far. Welcome to the session. We are just waiting for a couple more people to join, and then we'll get started. We've got lots of people who have joined already, actually. Nice prompt arrival. So give it a minute or so, and then we'll get started. Thank you. Who's just recently joined, we have got a good number of people already connected. We're just going to give them another minute or so, and then we'll get started for the day. Thanks. Got a good number of people connected. I'm going to turn my camera on. So I don't know, Chris and Helena, if you want to do like a reveal, make it a bit more showbiz, but if you want to turn your cameras on and join us, I think we'll get started. Here we go. Hi, Chris. Hey, Helena. So I think we've got, probably nearly half the people we're expecting join. So I think we're going to get started. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us for this third session. As you can see on screen, this has been a series of sessions talking about server-side implementation, server-side testing. We today in the third one in the home straight, where we're going to be focusing on integrating the capability into your business. I think although we put this last, it's almost for me it's kind of how this all triggered really. When we were talking to lots of clients who were considering server-side, already had it. A lot of the questions we got were not about technology, weren't about features and functions of different tools. They were about how do we make this work? How does it fit into our business? How do we make the most of it? So hopefully in the session today, you're going to hear some insights, some experiences from both Chris and Helena working with various brands to make this happen. But before we get into the content, I'm pretty sure everyone who's joined this knows what server-side testing is, and we're not going to do a dummies guide today. But just to be very clear, what we're talking about. We're talking about delivering tests, experiments, personalization experiences, where it's delivered at the server end, not through the client browser, as in traditional kind of A/B testing, CRO. That's about as technical as we're going to get today, I think. I'm trying to think through the topics we've got, but I'm happy to get into the more detail if we need to. Format today is going to be very conversational. I'm going to introduce Chris and Helena properly in a moment. But first, we just wanted to get to know the audience a little bit. We've done this for anyone who joined the first two. Apologies if this is a bit repetitive, but for us, it's been very difficult to find relevant content that covers everything in an hour. It's impossible, but also to make it applicable to everyone. So some of the questions are on the right-hand side of your screen. If it's not already showing, if you click the little menu, you should see 3 polls that we've published. We just really would love you to fill those in so we get an idea of who's on the phone, what level of kind of engagement you've had with server-side to date, where you're at from an experimentation or a testing perspective, and also what department you're from. And I think we'll probably talk about why that's relevant to us a bit later on. But yeah, if you could fill that in that panel. Also, there's a little chat window where we will be taking any questions at the end. We've put about 5 minutes or so aside at the end of the session today to have a bit of Q&A. If we run out of time, I'll explain that later on. But if you have any questions during, just pop those questions in the chat, and we'll pick the easiest ones and answer them at the end. But before we get into it, let me maybe start with letting people introduce themselves. So Helena, would you mind saying hello and introducing yourself?
Yep. Hello. My name's Helena Mathieson. Yeah, as Mike said, I work at Monetate, so I'm a senior strategy consultant here. I have been at Monetate for about 4 years, but actually working with brands to optimize their e-commerce sites for over 10 now. So yeah, my role at Monetate really is just to guide clients on their kind of strategic direction. So really at a high level, making sure that they're getting the most out of their testing and personalization program, whether that be with governance, objectives and just kind of setting up for success.
Great. Thanks, Helena.
And
Chris.
Yeah, I'm the Chief Experience Officer at Credit CX. So my role is I head up the strategy team there and also the UX design team at Credit CX. And my relevant involvement really is that I work quite closely with some of our clients who are currently doing a mix of client-side and also server-side tests. So I've been quite involved in discussing the strategy behind some of these bigger, more complex tests. And I really think that I suppose my UX side is always looking to make bigger improvements to the whole of the customer experience, and I see server side as one of the ways to start to achieve bigger impact in that area.
Great, thanks, Chris. So we're going to kick off talking through a few topics. We've got a few we've had a couple of phone calls between the three of us just to talk through some of the common things we experience. The first one, which has been repeated in the others, is really trying to set the scene in terms of why server-side in the first place. And we've talked of, in fact, the first webinar a couple of weeks back was solely focused on the use cases and the business cases behind it, and the reasons why people make this move. And we repeated it when we talked about tech last week. But I think it's relevant again just to set the scene, and particularly for your experiences of Helena and Chris in terms of what you've seen, why your customers have gone in this direction. And yeah, maybe Helena, if you could start just talking about some of the use cases you've come across or things that you find particularly interesting.
Yeah, sure. It's actually, yeah, I mean, it is an interesting topic just because we are seeing an increase of our customers starting to use server side more and more. And actually, it's quite varied in the reasons for why they might start to use it. And so that's why I guess there's always something to say about it, I think, first of all. But one example we work with the hotel chain, the Travelodge. So they have a really product-led team, and they wanted to choose server side because they just wanted to really streamline testing process and reduce costs. They wanted to go all out, basically, server side. They basically use Monetate to make the decision, and then once they know the winning variant, they love the fact that then it's basically on the site. So for them, it's kind of like saving that time at the end, which they love. And they feel like it allowed them to kind of multiply the impact of going live with winning tests in that short amount of time. So that was like a really good example. They did big full page tests. They do, reduces flicker when they're doing those things, and they love it for that. But then on the flip side, we work with a global sportswear brand that they like to have a bit of a hybrid model. So they use server side to do a lot of their testing, but they also keep the tag on going on as well, and they will run some experiences using tag and some experiences using server side, and they like that because it gives them the kind of agility to do more. They feel like also they can use the kind of Monetate out the box targeting, so things like location, weather, behavioral targeting. They can kind of use that strategy that they might have for all of that kind of personalization, and they can use that then for their server-side testing because they can use the targets with server-side or just with their regular tag implementation. So two quite different stories, but both of them really interesting and having a lot of success there.
Great. Thank you, Helena. Chris, so a question to you.
So just a couple of, I think what's often helpful also is the more, it is around thinking about the use cases, because we get to a point where we have a roadmap and you reach the limits of client side, I feel. And that's always a bit frustrating, but if we start to incorporate server side alongside, it just means we can do so many things. For example, with a healthcare client we're working with, we were able to test a completely new AI algorithm that analyzes the patient's symptoms. So instead of just working on the front end user experience, we're able to actually test a whole new application on that side. Another company we're working with, we're able to test a whole new different part of the help and support section. So again, the big kind of change, again, not for the UI, but actually the whole application, including a new database. for the help services side. And I mean, the current test we're currently working on is actually working with 3 distinct audiences for an experiment, where there's different behind the login. There's one audience, and there's advanced users, and that was another really difficult task, which was just not possible for client-side testing.
Yeah, so that gets into the more complex back-end testing. I think Helena mentioned the efficiency and being able to get more production-ready code ready. I think some of the other use cases we talked through the other week are around performance of the site, and just I think Helena, you touched on, I think you called it in the past hybrid, sort of the client and server thing together, and we'll talk about that a bit more later on. I think one of the kind of big topics for today, and again the reason why we put this series together was, I think the slide actually says the word fear, which I think is quite appropriate. And actually, we heard this a lot before we set up this series, and also it's come through in some of the questions that we've received both during and after the sessions over the last few weeks. I think if I talk about before the webinar series, we had a lot of clients who were thinking about it, but it seemed too scary, too big a thing to take on, although some of the benefits seem to be obvious. And then even people who've already bought it, we've met a few clients along the way who have bought the tool, but haven't really done much with it because it just seems too big a challenge. So I think the 3 of us had a little chat through a few kind of bullet points there, and it'd be great to hear, maybe Chris, if you could talk through some of the ones that you've come across and some of your thoughts.
I mean, I think the one that's come up the most is just the perceived technical challenge of server side, and in some ways this is 2 parts. It's not just actually the technical side from making the change but it's almost like the extra teams it's going to involve quite naturally, because what server-side testing requires you to do is actually talk to different teams around the organization. So it can no longer only be the remit of one optimization team, CRO team, personalization team, etc. You need to talk to all the other teams involved because it involves the different parts of the product. So a lot of people think that's a really difficult thing, and they see that as one of the big hurdles, and actually that does stop them from even getting going sometimes. So that's a big one I hear all the time. The other thing actually is around something I've heard a lot from agencies and consultancies as well as internal teams, is just the new skill sets required. So what we had to do at CCX, we had to upskill our development team when we were involved in actually doing the coding of server-side tests, and that's what we had to do, and it worked for us. So we have full stack developers now do it for the A/B testing instead of only client side. And I suppose the last point really was this kind of relinquishing control again. I was speaking to a large retailer, and the optimization team were very nervous about server side because they'd have to start talking to all their own development teams and their own product teams, and they're almost afraid of doing that. They were happier when they had full control over the full roadmap and program, and they were kind of saying, oh my God, it's going to slow everything down, they're going to get in the way, there's going to be so much feedback, and basically it's going to be too difficult. Oh, I wish we could just stick to client side because it's so much easier, type of thing. And that was their fear before embracing server side. So a few things from me.
Yeah, we were saying, weren't we? We were talking about this before. I think this is such a kind of common thread, because I was saying I had very similar examples with some of the retailers that we've been working with, where a testing and personalization program isn't an easy thing just to get off the ground. And so naturally the team that is running that, if it's going well, is going to then have some concerns about bringing in a whole separate team that suddenly have their own ideas and want to do their own things, and don't know the theory around what makes a good test, and so that that is really common. And I think it's trying to kind of I think there's various different ways of addressing it, but I think going back to what I talked about before, one of the things is having that kind of hybrid model, which actually can mean that the team that has been responsible for the program can continue essentially being responsible. They may need to add a few more people into their team from different departments, but they can still ultimately hold the control over the kind of roadmaps, I guess, what's going on if they're using hybrid, because they can kind of decide, well, actually, we want to do some testing, client side, or we want to do this server side, and they own that control. And I guess another way that they do that is what we call site templates. So they can actually, we can empower them right at the beginning to say to them, you know what, why don't you choose the areas on your site that you want to be server-side actions? So is it the homepage banner? Is it, you know, is it somewhere on the PLP? And that can then get built out by the development team. And once it's been built, it can, you know, in Monetate, it can be reused then as an action. They just can change out the targets, change out the content. So they actually still have that agility. It does take a little bit of extra kind of upfront work, but I think so. Yeah, as you can see on the screen now, here's an example we give to some of our clients at the beginning, and we'd say, why don't you map out what it is that you feel comfortable having as a server-side experience that you think would be something that would be reused, homepage banner at the top, and think about that. And then the other areas of the site can continue to be your kind of client-side agile areas. So
it's definitely that forward planning, isn't it? That's one of the differences. So when we get something working really well for our clients, like you were saying, Helena, it's all about that. There's a little bit more forward planning in the roadmap and in the preparation, but it doesn't need to be a major obstacle, does it?
No, 100%. Governance.
And I think
that's all it is.
Yes, governance. Yeah. I think, and Chris, that forward planning bit, I think we, last week when we were going through the session, we were talking about the technical implementation. I got to a point where I just sort of sat back for a minute and listened to the other speakers and thought, we're making this sound really scary. And I think we probably would have talked about this anyway, but because we're trying to introduce all these topics and considerations, it does make it sound like it's a really big topic. And we're probably adding to the fear maybe by highlighting things people hadn't considered. But I think the point is get ahead of it. I think, for people who, I said earlier, there's sort of two customers at the moment we meet, some that are frozen on whether they should do it or not, and others who have started and already bought it but not done much. I think if you address that second group, it's really how can we make sure that we are giving people some ideas about what you could do to get started, or how to address some of these so that we're not kind of adding to the fear. I think, well, hopefully as we go through, we'll give them more answers and not more things to be scared of. But time will tell whether we achieve that. I think, Chris, there was one, I don't know where this falls on scary or not scary, Chris, but you mentioned this when we were talking through the topic.
No, it's an interesting one, this, because in some ways a bit like some of the cases I spoke about, it's the ability to test things that you just couldn't test in client side. But that whole phrase, we test everything, is a bit of reality for some of the bigger product led companies in the world at the moment. Not many people are doing this, but it is certainly almost like this. Is it a pipe dream? Is it a pipe dream? But one day we're going to get to a point where every decision we make as an organization will be based on data, will be based via a control test like this. And I think server side does enable you to do this. There's no way we could have, those three cases I mentioned were just not possible in client side. So it just opens up that possibility. But I wonder if this is frightening for some people, that they think it will somehow slow things down. I really think that's another point sometimes. It's like, I have heard when people talk about testing everything, we can't do that, we'll never get anything done, which is an interesting thing, because you could argue, isn't that better than making tons of mistakes and implementing tons of untested product features and updates in front of our customers would actually make the whole experience worse. And I would go for for absolutely trying to aim to test more, absolutely. But no, it's just an interesting topic, really. Yeah. I think.
Yeah, and I think surprisingly, I don't think we've got a slide here where we talk about the culture of experimentation. I think in the first two we've mentioned the word culture a lot. We are going to talk about teams and operating models, etc. And I think Helen, you touched on it earlier in terms of when you talk about relinquishing control or people who are scared to introduce other parties into the mix. I think this bit here, if you're broadening the scope of testing, you are talking about involving other teams. When we were talking about operating models, you probably used this phrase way too many times now, but when I was speaking to Helena last week, I said that we get a lot about operating models, and I have a personal issue with everyone kind of defaulting to centers of excellence as the only model. But I think there are different models that suit different businesses. But Helena made a really good point, and actually maybe I'll let you say it. You probably say it better than I did, Helena, around, maybe why a centre of excellence might be more appropriate for a move to server side.
And I do totally get what you're saying. You hear people saying words and you're like, do you understand what that, like what does that actually entail? And I think that's what we were talking about, right? It's kind of separating out what we're actually referring to when we talk about centre of excellence, because it is something that I would encourage customers thinking about going onto server side to consider. But when I'm thinking about a centre of excellence, all it is really we now need to consider that there are many more different departments that might be involved if we're starting to do server side. So not only IT, but we were actually talking earlier, you've got your content team, potentially the people that own your CMS might want to be involved. You've got various people from the product teams, trade, etc. So this is no longer something that could potentially just be run by one or two people in an A/B testing team, which has worked really well previously. This is now something where you need to be considering, all of these different people. So when we talk about a centre of excellence, what we're kind of talking about is actually thinking about taking one person from each of those teams to kind of create this core group. Now, this group then meets up regularly. They become the kind of thought leaders in terms of testing and personalization, although they're still part of those groups, whether that be IT or content. They still sit within those teams, but they understand the process of testing, personalization, and they are responsible then for kind of owning the roadmap and taking in those ideas from their teams, bringing them to this kind of collective of people, I guess, or the centre of excellence, and then deciding on, how do they prioritize? How do they decide, what type of experience do we want this to be? Is it going to be server side? Is it going to be client side? So I think that's kind of where we're going to when we talk about it. It feels like it will not be scalable, and you could potentially become a blocker if you don't start to consider including all of those other teams in your decision making around your testing program.
Yeah, so it almost forces you to move from the typical kind of optimization centralized team, doesn't it? Because server side naturally requires that you get involved in other teams, that you move towards center of excellence. Actually, I think that's where you almost have to do it, which rather than being something we should be afraid of, actually this is the whole point of testing, isn't it? To get other teams involved and to help them and educate them actually and guide them into the power of testing, I would say. And server side is a natural way to do that, I'd say.
Yeah, I think one of the things for me that really, as I say, I had a strong opinion before talking to Helena, and I do, what I really like about the idea of a centre of excellence being maybe the right way, at least to start, even if it's not your long-term operating model, is the idea of having champions who, one thing that I always see is if you go to conferences and you hear the visionary bit, the visionary idea of what the business should be is not necessarily what people then return to the desk and do, right? It's what we all sit and nod vociferously in a meeting about, but then people go back to their day job and their own KPIs and objectives and bonuses. So I think it's to really change behavior, change the way the business operates. It needs more than just a one-off vision setting and then off you go back to your day jobs. And by having those champions dispersed through the business, you've got someone who is continually reinforcing this message. And even if you're not going to change the way the business operates in a big bang, having those people who are cheerleaders for change and who are kind of helping lead that, I think is a huge part of it. And
the other thing I think we also were talking about before is that, we've definitely had some clients where testing sits in such a small department and there really isn't that much visibility across the organization in terms of what they're doing. They're really not getting the kudos that they should be getting. They're doing testing. They are single-handedly essentially making the website better for their customers, and often they won't be getting the recognition that they should be getting from the business as a whole. And so actually a really positive thing about creating this model with champions from the different departments is you are getting this buy-in from the organization, and the organization as a whole becomes something that understands that testing and personalization and optimizing the site as much as possible is super important, and everyone's bought into that. So that's the other kind of plus, I guess, for having this model.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think Chris, you brought. I think we've got some slides. We talked about the alignment of teams in some of the better known organisations. If I jump over to the next one, I think Chris, maybe if you could talk us through. You picked a couple of the bigger brands who are well known for the way they operate.
So a lot of people understand Spotify, and because they were one of the first people to go down the squad route, which is effectively product teams, and then tribes, which are groups of product teams, etc. So that's that decentralized type of team where they're responsible for different parts of the customer journey. And I think the key thing with these teams, and the other diagram on the left here is from Wayfair's product organization. And again, this is another example. You'd have to look very close to the screen, sorry, to see it. But there is an analyst in every one of those teams, as well as a product manager, engineer, UX researcher, etc., in each of those teams, which means that they are all working together on the common objective, and they're empowered to do so to make the site continually better, their particular part, and to launch A/B tests and test everything. So that's obviously they're very huge organizations, but it's a couple of examples of the different ways of working here. I think it's almost like this can come across as almost like the dream way of working, and I know, but it can be a bit, that can actually be daunting as well, can't it? I mean, as soon as you see organizations where there's like 50 product teams responsible, and you times that by 6 in every product team, you think, well, we don't have like 300 people working on our website at the moment, so it is a bit hard to imagine sometimes. That's the only thing we're looking at these.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting to know what you can do, how far you can take testing and experimentation.
Yeah. And actually, we're going to leave questions to the end, but there's a question that's come through from Jamie. While you read that, I'll just another point. And I think I said earlier about there's the difference between the vision you get at a conference and the reality of what you do when you get back to your desk. I think that's one thing I've always had I personally cringe a bit when people say, and I'm guilty of it. We generally have a Jeff Bezos in the presentation sometimes, because you can't do anything about experimentation without Amazon, Booking, Facebook, Google. Everyone references them as this vision of what good looks like, but they didn't start with the same problems that, I don't know, a 100-year-old bank with millions of customers who's trying to do a digital transformation has. It's very different challenges when you've got existing kind of history and customers and products to change. Whereas if you're building the digital first business from fairly agile beginnings, it's a different kind of problem. And I think that I don't know, guys, if you had a chance to look at Jamie's question there, I think that speaks to that a little bit in terms of, is there does the structure of the existing organization give you an indication of whether it's going to be easy or difficult for people to embrace the execution of server-side testing? Either of you, I'll put you on the spot.
Yeah, I would say it definitely makes a big difference. On the organizations we work with where it's easiest, they are already, it's helpful because they already understand what experimentation and testing is. So they already understand what an A/B test is, even though they're not working in the optimization team. So they have that understanding. The other thing I'd say is where an organization already works in kind of small teams where they can make decisions themselves rather than the decisions going all the way to the top for everything. That's always an indicator of where it's going to be easier. I know that kind of relates to testing more generally, but that kind of if they allow smaller teams to have the power to make their own judgments and to launch tests and to make sign off at a lower level, that's always a good sign that server side is going to be a bit easier for them.
And Helena, any other thoughts on that?
It's difficult for me to not be emotionally involved in this one because I can see the message from Jamie at John Lewis, and I know what the organisation structure's like there. So obviously it's going to be easier when it's a smaller, streamlined, super kind of agile company. When you've got a kind of more traditional bricks and mortar that have traditional ways of doing things, you going as a person that's been running a testing program that doesn't have a lot of visibility in the organization and saying, this is how I think we need to be set up, we need these people from all of these different teams. That's not going to happen overnight, I guess, is what I would say. And I understand that, we talked about this before, it's very easy for all of us, as in a kind of agency world, to come in and say, this is what good looks like, just go and do it. But actually executing that, it does take time, and kind of baby steps. And I think that does kind of lead actually on into something that we've been talking about, which is we kind of operate on this kind of program success plan basis at Monetate. So we try to get all of our clients to be thinking about the program success plan, which is taking it all the way up to the highest level of what the organizational objectives are. So you're feeding into the kind of highest level of what the company is working towards as a team. And then you're starting to think about what projects you might want to operate on that would fit into what those organizational structures are. That then sets a bit of a trend. You can then kind of open that out towards the whole business if you want to, and say, look, we're running a testing program and personalization. Send us over your ideas. However, all of your ideas need to fit in with, these things. And if they don't, then they may not be higher priority. And that is a way of engaging people in from across the business. And I think there is an element of that, first of all, is just getting the engagement first, then worrying about making it this like kind of perfect, refined model of center of excellence. So we feel like that gives some success. It also gives you some control as a team. If you're the person that owns that kind of program success plan, you can, sign that off with whoever it is. Often we would get that signed off all the way up to the sort of exec level. This is what we're all working towards. We're all kind of accountable for this. And then you have this way of kind of collecting all of these different ideas and making sure that you're not losing focus, because I think that's the other thing that can happen is, you get these different teams involved, and then someone's, been at a conference and saw that, changing the butter color to pink is like the perfect thing to do. And that's what they want to do because that's what they've suddenly discovered testing. And how do you kind of keep all of that in track? So always referring them back to, we have this plan, we have these objectives that we're working towards, can help you really kind of maintain that control, and hopefully start to widen out your net of how many people are involved within the business. That was long-winded. I hope that answered your question.
Well, I certainly found it interesting. I think there's a couple of other things that I would add, just to going back to Jamie's question as well, in that I think organizational structure for me as well. So I've moved around it a bit in Martech, and one of the things that I found quite common in other challenges was we used to talk about who owned the customer. And I think there was that when customer experience became a thing, you'd have people who were like director of customer experience or someone head of customer experience. Sometimes those people didn't really have teeth, if you'd pardon the term, like they didn't really have any power to make change. But one of the things we found quite common is that different teams within a business would be fighting for the same customer. If you landed on the homepage, even just at a website level, you might have different product teams who are all trying to get the attention of the customer, and the end net result is a bad customer experience. So I'd argue if there is already some kind of philosophy about having a single view, or not necessarily ownership, but that we're all working together to service the same customer, that makes a big difference. I think if you've already taken the steps towards that, it makes a big thing. And the other thing I would add is anywhere there's a culture of internal communication, and I used to always call it internal PR. Anyone who's on the call last week, apologies because I might be repeating a story, but I had a customer years ago who did a great job of POC for a testing platform, and then did what most technical people tend to do, is to just head down and tested. And they didn't talk about their success for 2 years. And then when we wanted to invest in something, we couldn't get funding. And someone senior said, that's just a cost. It doesn't generate revenue. Because we'd made the mistake of kind of getting lost in our own world. We knew well, it wasn't me. The team knew they were delivering value. They knew they were adding incremental revenue to the business, but they stopped talking about it. And I think anywhere where there's a culture of discussing what's happening, even if you are quite siloed, at least if other people know that you're doing testing or experimentation, that's naturally going to help it make the next step a bit easier if you've already had those discussions. And this is not a completely new topic for us.
Yeah, we've had that as well. Often people saying we don't really know how to PR what we're doing. And I think, again, that kind of comes back to how do we talk about the success of what we're doing? And I think going back to the plan and having these kind of clear objectives can be really useful, because you can then say, we ran this test because we wanted to see that it would fit this objective, reduce bounce on PDP, for example, and it did by X amount. So it's a really clear way of messaging out what you're doing. It resonates with everyone in the business because that's all, everyone's working towards these shared objectives. So I think we've definitely had to support a lot of our customers in terms with that, exactly what you would say, internal PR. It's like sending out these emails and kind of bigging up the work that you're doing, because it can often get lost.
Yeah. I tend to offend people by stereotyping, but it's I think it's a natural tendency, and I'm one of those people to think that the results will speak for themselves. They just think, we're just going to do so much cool stuff. I don't need to do PR. It's a bit cheesy, and it's a waste of my time. Or in reality, forgetting that, it's actually usually just so busy that it's like, do I spend 5% of my time writing up a lovely, beautiful PDF and sending it around the business, or do I get on with the next thing? And the next thing is shouting louder usually. So it's a difficult thing to get right, but I think it does make a difference, and it's probably less about organizational structure, but part of organizational culture.
I think one of the interesting things that one of our clients did, and I've done it with 2 people now, but it was actually having conversations with the finance team very early on when introducing the concept of testing. So and they're in such a situation now that they won't launch things unless they have been launched as a test, and yet they have a very simple way of presenting results that is universally understood within the organization as these are the things we need to test. These are and they're very strong on the common goals. So a lot of the work when we do strategy work, we talk about the North Star metric a lot, but the point of that is, again, like you were saying, Helena, it's to get them aligned, get all the teams in alignment with what they're trying to do, and the importance of doing that.
And I think so. Some of the slides Helena had shared, this the one that's on the screen at the moment is a Monetate standard template. Is that right? The way you, or sort of an example of the template you use for success plan. And I forget if you referenced that. You also shared one of the sort of the idea of a roadmap.
Yeah,
as
and
well.
the roadmap usually it will be on 2 tabs, and you can kind of see, although it's very small there, so probably not that well, but we're beginning to think about things like prioritization once you get into the roadmap. So usually the first tab is that kind of snapshot overview for anyone that is not super into what you're doing in your program but wants a high level view. So first page will show key objectives, and then usually a calendar view of like blocked out areas of what's being worked on, so I can see at a snapshot, right, the product page is something that is being focused on over the next 3 months. So I've got some ideas, great, I'm going to start submitting them. But I can see checkout is a focus in January. So, right, I know that I'm going to submit some ideas, but they might not be looked at for a bit. So it's that understanding of what the team's working on. This is the kind of next level down where, the ideas start to be fleshed out. So I've been to a conference, and I think having pink checkout buttons is what I want. Well, now let's put this to paper and start to fill this out. And this is really useful. It's like, okay, what's the hypothesis behind that? What are you doing here? And what are you trying to improve? And quite quickly, in a nice way, we might see that some of those ideas might start to fall away a little bit, because you're actually once you're actually putting this all down there and thinking about what you're measuring, it can kind of wheedle out some of that. So that's why we love some sort of format of a program plan with a roadmap.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I think that leads on that we were going to talk a bit more about kind of frameworks and roadmaps, collaboration across multiple teams. There's a lot of topics here. I forget. I mean, either of you. Chris, I know we were talking about having a single roadmap or multiple roadmaps. I think we were talking the other day about someone. Do you need a client-side roadmap, a server-side roadmap, a personalization roadmap, business initiatives? Are they all independent?
So many roadmaps, you'd never get to where you want to go. Yeah. I mean, it's an interesting one, because actually there's always been this problem of optimization teams having one roadmap and then the product teams having another roadmap. This is an ongoing problem we face all the time. And the optimization team will have some amazing ideas about to optimize the checkout process, and yet 2 months' time, the checkout process has already been redesigned. So it's it's a waste of time. Which again just leads to the importance of teams coming a bit closer together. And if you think with server-side testing, you should be already have a plan to test out that new checkout process which is going live. So because you'll be testing that possibly through server-side testing. So again, it's just the way that the teams need to work really close together. But whether you have one roadmap or more is a really important point. What works best for our clients is that we have a single roadmap with multi-dimensions. And then it does get complicated when you start to add on markets to that as well, but it's still important to have things in the right place, in the same place. and then just reference all the major site changes like the checkout redesign or updates in that roadmap. And of course, then just get involved in those conversations and talk to the teams and say, hey, we should be doing this as a test. And actually, did you know we can do something even more with what you were planning if you get our team involved?
You just made me think of something, but definitely, when we're working with our global clients and, you've got the various different markets, it is another dimension you're adding in. And some of the things some of the kind of most successful plans we've seen have been a hybrid again of both. So a very clear, and actually often that will be server side. So a very clear single server side roadmap of everything that's going to be running server side across all of the sites, across all of the domains internationally. And then the markets might have their own kind of what they would call kind of like agile testing, which might be the kind of client side, and they can make small tweaks, but kind of they don't necessarily make the major changes. And that's come about often where the markets have said, you know what, we know the culture of our market. So, you guys make the decision about the structure of the site if you want to, but let us show the content, let us have the kind of tone of voice, let us decide promotions. And so there is that hybrid model again, where you could have the kind of core structure of one roadmap, but with smaller teams feeding in and just being responsible for making tweaks and changes. And so they feel like they've got some autonomy, but overall it's being overseen by the kind of global team or the center of excellence, whoever it is that kind of owns that central roadmap.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a part of that, I mean, Chris and I were talking this morning about a client with multiple markets where, and from our own experiences, that actually, this is not necessarily just about server side. This is broadly about using roadmaps across multiple products, brands, markets, etc. It's just the network effect of being able to reuse elements or extensions or frameworks or templates, and also just you being able to test things in different markets. I personally had some experiences where we got to a really good place where it was really efficient to run a test in one market, look at the results, and then publish the results in a way that the network across all the markets could pick it up and say, actually, let's test and see if it's relevant for our market. And then we would start to learn whether what we were discovering was true of a particular market or of a particular brand or the bigger brand as a whole, or maybe just the product. I think to get to the level of detail we had, we would have had to have hundreds of tests, but by kind of navigating a matrix of different tests that can be reused and repurposed in different markets, it really helps accelerate your learnings, I think. And I find that fascinating. It's complicated at first, but it comes back to having that kind of broader, almost zoomed out roadmap, but then still allowing individual markets to have the agility to go and do their own thing. And I think that also touches on, well, I think you might have mentioned already, Helena, the hybrid thing of having, client and server side running in parallel.
And I think just to add also, it's what organizations need to almost aim for is when all the individual teams who are not experts in testing, where they know it's an option moving forwards. So the more advanced clients we work with, it doesn't matter what team we're in, whether it's content or marketing or whether it's engineering who are busy developing that new, for the healthcare app, that new algorithm, that they know testing is an option and they know that that's what they should do. And then actually, then it's their own roadmap, isn't it, for what the area they're responsible for, which is incorporating the testing. It's just that in those situations, those people need help to make it happen. And then they need to know where to go. So they need to know that they can talk to the specialist team over there. Back to the centre of excellence.
Always comes back to the centre of excellence. Thought leaders as well. Is what we kind of talk champions or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, totally agree. You need that core team that know what they're doing in order to kind of to not let it run away. You've definitely seen it where things run away a little bit and just become testing for the sake of testing, or running so many tests that they overwrite each other, or those problems occur. So
those interaction effects that you get sometimes when there's too many, and then it causes the QA manager to have a bit of a heart attack sometimes.
Well, yeah, unless you're something like we were saying about this, unless you're someone like Booking.com, where you're okay with running thousands and thousands of tests on your site all the time, and it's always going to be different, and that's okay. I think most of the customers that we work with are not like that, and so they don't, they're very cautious, and so it's kind of you don't really want to have things fighting for each other. But something that I'm not sure if this is the right time to bring this in, but something that we kind of use at Monetate to help combat that is a prioritization modeling, which I think is not going to be unfamiliar. I know you guys have got your own version, and they're all quite similar, but it is something that can be useful. Yeah, on the screen you can see these are some of the questions that we would always ask if anyone comes with an idea. And again, like going back to that kind of roadmap picture, we get you to put the experience, name what it is that you're trying to achieve, and then yes or no answers. Is it in line with the business objectives that we've talked about? And if it's not, well, then it gets a 0. If it is, give it a 1, or you can choose how you want to score it, but we just do 1 or 0. It becomes more kind of binary, I guess, and less subjective, but that's what we're trying to do. So is it measurable? Are you using data insights for this, or is it just an idea that you've plucked out of the air? And then we're thinking about, is it increasing your customers, motivation to buy or to do whatever it is that you're trying to get them to do? And when we're thinking about the experience, we're thinking, is it a high traffic location? Another really common thing we see is that people spent weeks building experiences, and then it's at the bottom of a blog page that no one sees and nothing happens, and that can be really demoralizing. So I think those are things that we're getting you to consider. Is it noticeable within 5 seconds? Because if it's not, then maybe your test will have inconclusive results. And I know we're going off onto kind of testing theory more than server side, but these are just things to think about, and why it's important to get anyone that's new to this, or any of the new teams that are coming in, to think about these questions. But the final point is just to think about reusable, and what you were saying, Mark, about the kind of global teams. It's really useful here to be thinking about, if we build this action, can other markets use it? For example, if they're global, can this be used again in some other format? Because we're always trying to get people to think about scaling and keeping it simple. And so rather than reinventing the wheel all the time, just use things that are already there. So once you kind of go through this, you should be able to get a score. You can then take all of your ideas. Some of our customers would do this like once a week. They'd get all of the ideas, and we have forms that we send them that they can send out to everyone across the business and encourage people to send through all of the ideas. They have a meeting once a week. They go through all of the ideas. They prioritize all of them like this, so they get 1, 2 points. And then they look at the list of all of the ideas, and they start to be able to put them into some sort of order, and they can communicate that back out. We prioritize these based on this matrix that we're using, and this is what you've got. But yeah, exactly. It can look like this. So here's an example of one where we've kind of got the two examples, 2 experience ideas there, and you can see that the model and numbers 1, 2, or 0 going across, and you can see then there it says priority. The first one's got a 12, and the second one's got a 15, I think. So that 15 one would be the one that's got the highest score, so maybe would be the one that would be worked on first. It's a really easy way of saying no without saying no as well to people that you might not want to say no to, helping out with the hippo syndrome. So yeah, there's a lot of benefits to using something like this, and we really encourage our customers to customize this. We kind of give an example, and then we say, you do what's going to work for you, and add in additional questions if you think that will work.
Yeah, I think I would add just because of the things that came up in the first 2 webinars, I think one of the things that we're seeing is that this sort of the scoring or the scoring framework that goes behind this prioritization model continually has to be evolving and changing. I think we had a great kind of, in the first session we were talking about use cases, and we had a client who'd gone through this, and we were talking about the improvements to performance of the website, and by using server side, can you get the page to load faster, and how this is not just an IT problem anymore. And Stuart, who was talking, had a good point, saying he'd always seen any tag on the site, he sees it as a tax on the user experience, and it's balancing out the value of what you're going to learn, or what the outcome of that test is going to be. So it has to be one of the factors in your prioritization framework. If we're going to affect the user performance in some way, or user experience in some way, is it worth it? And I think similarly, it also links to one of the questions we had in that session. Was one of the guys was listening and said, if you're building server-side tests and you're spending more time building kind of almost production-ready code, you're effectively slowing down what, in the past where you can potentially drag and drop a test and hack the experience, is that how does the business respond to slowing things down? I think, for us, well, for me anyway, it felt like, well, that just has to be another feature in the roadmap scoring and prioritization framework. So you either decide sometimes this is such a high value, it's worth adding in, that's a cost. The building that test is a cost. And how do we balance it out? So if we've got a solid roadmap, we should be able to say, well, to buy ourselves permission to do this really cool thing that we want to do, we need to do a few other tests that are quicker but are still going to have an impact. And it's how you can sort of conduct the orchestra and juggle all those things so that you've got results coming out of one end, but you're also not just always going after quick wins or low-hanging fruit and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
I think this has to keep evolving as you add more factors in of cost, time, impact on the customer, etc., and whatever data you can find. Really.
The one thing we do with our clients that really helps is when the idea is very much an idea and we haven't invested a lot of work and a design on it yet, we check with our engineers very early on what the best what the feasibility is and whether it needs to be client side or server side, and that's the key thing. So actually many server side tests does require more planning and more time, but if we mark it in the roadmap really early on, that means that we can just plan for it. And that works really well. So we just flag it up early, and our engineers say, no, this one actually, like the one I was talking about earlier with the 3 different audiences, it was that one. No, actually, we can't do that. So we can't do that client side. So that has to be server side. So they would change that in the spreadsheet server side, and then we can start planning that in for a bit later and actually planning all the work and all the teams we need to talk to make it happen. So it's that kind of that's really important.
Yeah, that the only other thing on that, you just sort of spark something as well, is that we do sometimes find that it might be that if a customer of ours suddenly has access to server side, they might be saying, right, what should we do that's server side? And again, what we would do is, and kind of what you were saying there, Chris, is that we're still not ever wanting to lose sight of what you're testing. And so we would always say, start with the test idea, start with what you're trying to achieve first, start backwards. You've got a balance problem on your PDP. What do you want to do? Okay, we want to move this around. Would this be better in a client side, or would this be better as a server side? So rather than that kind of front way, like, oh, we just want to change this thing because we've got a cool server side, which may or may not give you the results that you need, because if you haven't got that strong hypothesis, then it may not be. It might be cool and fun, but it does. So again, and I think that's what you were saying as well. It's like it's for me, nothing changes. You still got a testing roadmap. The only thing that changes is that when you're going through it, you're deciding how, what do we want to do? Do we want to spend the money on making this server side? Is it worth it? Or not? And do we have the time and resource, etc.? Yeah.
And I just, from our point of view, one of the biggest, most important things in the prioritization is just how big is the customer problem we're solving with this. And that it says the quantifying early on the potential and the importance of it will help you prioritize, I think, and whether to invest all this money in building that new that whole new system that's going to go behind the test and power it is worth it or not.
Yeah, I think, to me, as I say, what I was saying is that it has to keep evolving, but I think, it's a good to have a starting point. And I think, Helena, you said that we're going to share some of the templates and that you've shown today and a few other materials at the end. So we'll send a feedback email after this session today, and it'll include some of the materials that Monetate make available to their customers. It makes it a lot easier than starting with a blank page, obviously, and you can adjust it yourselves. I'm sure Monetate can help you to tweak it over time. We are running out of time, so we're going to move on to Q&A. We've got one question sitting there in the chat, which I'm rather than force you to read it out loud and answer straight, I'm just going to I'll keep talking to the audience while you guys read it and fight over who wants to answer the question. Generally, as I said at the top, it's difficult to have a 1-hour session that covers all the topics in depth, and particularly, I think for each different customer, each different business, we could spend several hours workshopping what's relevant to you. So hopefully you've taken a few little pieces out of this that are useful to you. Both Chris and Helena and myself are happy to kind of follow up with people after the session today. I'll be sending out an email with a video so you can rewatch it and take more notes if you need to. Also, if you've got any questions at all, please reach out to us. I'll jump back to the Q&A. We had a question there from Kevin. I don't know, both of you aren't waving your hands around and who wants to answer it, right?
It's a really good question. I think on the first point was all about, does it get complicated if you want to test changing the page layout, adding new modules, etc., versus in server-side setup? So balancing future test ideas with all the setup. I think first, there's a lot of setup that you can do. The onboarding of server side is really, really important. And a lot of the work we do at the start is setting up our clients in a way that will make it easier after time. So there's a lot of work that can be done up front to prepare for server side testing.
I guess as well, I think part of what the question is that when we kind of showed that resort template is like all of these different areas. And I think it's that idea of, is it going to get confusing with lots of different changes? And I know I sound like a broken record, but again, it kind of goes back to planning and roadmap and prioritization. And it's, you maybe can't do all of that at the same time. But when you have a good kind of pre-test plan, so what you're doing there when you build out the template and you're saying, I want this area, and this area to be server-side, you're not necessarily saying that you're going to use that now. You're just getting it built and kind of ready so that at the time that you want to do it, you can. So it's kind of that kind of upfront planning that we've talked about a little bit before, rather than saying once they're all built, you've got to go active with everything, and it's all kind of go overwrite each other. So I think I'll always say, if you're planning and you got your roadmap, then you should be able to negate that problem.
Yeah, and of course this is related to the setup where you have defined areas, isn't it? I mean, of course, the other big part of server-side testing is actually more feature rollouts and feature flagging, which is also and brand new functionality that you introduce as a test through server-side testing, which is the other way, of course. So I hope that answers your question, Kevin. I'm not.
I was trying to read it while I was speaking. I can't really multitask well enough, but I think we'll follow up. After the session, we'll drop them a note to see if we did address that or not. As I said before, all of us are available for any follow-up questions afterwards. We haven't had any other more questions through. I think I actually we were thinking about a few other topics that we were going to include, but we were short of time. But I think we've kind of, in a rambling way, covered quite a lot of it. I think we talked before about whether we should talk more about hybrid, about client alongside server side, but I think that's come up loads quite naturally. That again, one of the trigger points for creating these sessions was people asking about the governance behind it and how do you get those two programs running alongside each other. We talked a bit about similarly with personalization programs that quite often sit within a different part of an organization, and the question of whether it all needs to come into one place. I think, Helena, have you seen, going back to the organizational question from Jamie earlier, have you seen companies that have had to dramatically change, and not particularly picking on Jamie's organization, dramatically change their organization to bring, say, personalization and testing together? I think particularly for Monetate, you have a specialism in personalization. And I still come across companies where they sit in completely different teams. Is it in a topic for you? Is that more a natural part of Monetate, or is it a server-side specific thing?
That's changing. I think that just generally is changing. The industry's changing. When I first started, it was definitely two separate optimization and testing was often UX, so that would often be there. And then like personalization might be with content. That would be often how we would see it, and they would be very separate. But I think go back to that, the sports retailer that we work with, they were really changing. For them, personalization is like number one to them, and being digital and personalized is absolutely their priority, which is why they continue to do very well. And so I think we took a lot of learnings from working with them, where they were sort of saying personalization drives things first, testing is part of that, but basically they're testing personalization. And I think that was a really good way for us to start to see it. It's there's always room for everything. There's never ever, we're never going to say your work with testing is done, only ever do segmentation or personalization, and we're never going to say do only personalization and don't keep testing, because things change. Look at COVID. Who could have predicted how differently people would start responding to the sites? And so you will always need to keep testing to understand how these new people that are coming to your site are responding in segmentation. But it is also super important to think about people responding to your site are different. All of these new customers you're getting that now aren't, maybe coming into your store and they're coming online, they maybe need a different experience to the people that will be coming to your site for the last 10 years and know exactly where everything is and understand it all. And so you should be personalizing, but you should be testing how that responds. So I think that, that's a topic that we could spend hours talking about, but that we feel really passionately about and Monetate, that it's definitely both, and you should be thinking about both of them, always when you're planning.
Yeah.
And there's another question
And
You
Chris
see,
is a good, yeah. I wonder if Chris, do you want to have a crack at that one? I think that's probably quite suited to you, particularly with your
yeah,
UX.
I mean, that's a really good question, Jamie. I think the interesting thing from client side and server side is that the nature of server side does naturally mean that things are built a bit more to perfection sometimes. You know, there's less. The thing I always go on about is that testing is actually research, and a testing variation is actually, in my mind, a prototype that you're putting out there as quickly as possible to the users to get feedback from their actions, actually telling you, voting for which one works best. And actually, when I think about all the server-side tests that we've done, they have been more precise. They have been nearer to finished applications because of the nature of the work that had to go in to build them. So yeah, they are a bit more. They're not perfection, because perfection, you should leave space always for iteration. But definitely client side gives you a bit more freedom and agility to get a test live more quickly, or a personalization experience live more quickly, and therefore learn quickly. So, and I think we shouldn't also forget the other types of testing. You know, the other kind of fake door or painted door tests, where we just want to really quickly, before building this brand new part of the site and launching it as a server-side test, you may very well want to put up something in front of customers, even if it's not fully built yet, hence a painted door test. And so I'd definitely say it's that combination, isn't it, of client side and server side, and making best use of each of them is the way forward.
But also, I would add, Chris, like there doesn't have to be one rule for sort of how production ready your server side test code needs to be, or how complete the application needs to be. That can vary on the level of confidence or how much investment. Again, it comes back to sort of having a structured framework for prioritization. I think, you know, when we're talking use cases 2 weeks ago, one of the main reasons for that client moving was that their business case was actually built around getting test winners live quicker. So one of their business cases was, we run a test, we find a conclusion that has a significant impact in revenue, and then we wait weeks, months to get it live in production. So server side means we can have production ready code almost. As soon as we win, we almost get it live, much quicker, and we recognize the revenue quicker. So that's obvious use case, but then that comes with it, added cost to doing the build. And also there's a cultural change there as well, and that now developers are being asked to build code that might get thrown away if the test doesn't work or doesn't go the way they expected. So, but I think part of the answer to that question is also, like, there isn't just one rule for everything. Like, if you can still build, you might need a server-side test because it uses back-end interaction with algorithms to change what the experience is, but you don't have to build a complete application unless you're really confident, or you think the code's reusable. Maybe, part of the assessment of each test should be, is this code going to be reusable enough that we should build it to like almost perfection, or should we just hack it together and make it work for now? I think that's another level of how we assess each test, and whether it's server side or client side, and then also if it's server side, how complete does it, or how perfect, to use Jamie's terms, does it have to be? Are we answering Jamie's question there around?
Do you find the pursuit of absolute perfection in UI in test what gets in the way of actual results? Yeah, I mean, I do, because if you have so many meetings. I've been in many meetings in the past where everyone's discussing the finite details of a piece of UI, where all that wasted hours and time could have been helped with a little bit more feedback from users, either in user sessions or, of course, from testing. I think we've all been there, spending 4 hours debating something. Just think what a better use you could use that time for. So yeah, in the pursuit of perfection, absolutely. I think you'll never get there.
Yes. Well, I think we haven't got any more questions coming through. I think we're over time as well, so I know people probably have got busy things to do. And Jamie's happy with the answer. Good.
That's good.
Good feedback. I will send out a short survey for everyone, because we'd really appreciate feedback on these sessions. I think this format of just having an informal chat hopefully is useful. Hopefully we can find people that can learn from some of the experiences we've had, some of the mistakes we've made. As I said before, we really appreciate you coming along. We'll share feedback, questions. Reach out to us with any questions. Thank you for your time. And Helena and Chris, thanks as well. Really appreciate everyone.
All right. Bye-bye.
Great.
Bye.
And
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.